Good morning, everybody. How are you guys? Good morning, Samantha.
Good morning.
How are you today?
I am good.
Good. So, everybody, welcome to another episode of Sandy Talks Sheet. Because y'all know I love talking sheet about crimes and mysteries and everything else. And so, Samantha is actually a referral from Shauna. And if y'all remember Shauna, she was on a show with me. So, Shauna, if you're watching, thank you so much for referring Miss Samantha to me. So, Samantha, tell me a little bit about you and how you became a crime junkie.
I think I really became a crime junkie. I was about 7 or 8, and my little sister was actually a man pulled up and tried to kidnap her out of our yard.
Oh my
And
gosh.
I think at that point I was really interested in thank goodness we were all there and we were able to call 911 and all this stuff, but they ended up finding the man in another small town trying to kidnap someone else, a little
Oh my
girl. And
gosh.
so I think that's when it all started, but I was like in the closet. I was so afraid of people thinking I was weird because I was so interested in serial killers and I was so interested in like what made people do what they did. And
Yes.
it wasn't until I was actually like in my 20s that my little sister was like talking about it. And I was like, oh, so it's totally okay to enjoy listening and to want to. I always thought I was just a little weirdo and it was, I thought something was wrong with me for being fascinated
Right.
by stuff. But that's when I was probably about 7 or 8 when I first like really got interested in it. Um,
Uh-huh.
didn't really explore everything until I was older, just because
Gotcha.
I really thought that there was something wrong with me.
Well, yeah, sometimes I feel like I'm broken too. I'm like, why do these things fascinate me? Why can I watch one after the other, but I can't sit still and watch a movie, especially a musical? Those are nightmares. I can't do that. But so you could this, I think for you, you could have gone two ways with it. You could have totally been fearful, but you
Mhm.
went like completely opposite and became intrigued. And so did your sister need therapy after that? Does she live with
No,
that fear?
so she was about 4 when it happened. So she
Hmm.
remembers it happening, but she doesn't it doesn't really bother her at all. So we were actually all outside playing in the yard, and my cousins were over, and the man just pulled up and just grabbed her. And um, my cousins grabbed sticks and they had rocks, and I ran in the house and called 911. And
Oh my
my
gosh.
cousins and my older sister actually fought him and got my sister back. And I guess them like putting up a fight, they just took off. But
Uh-huh.
they were they were found, and what they were doing, which is really really crazy, but they were finding little girls and taking them. And
Mhm.
so they caught them, in another small town, but they were just targeting small towns, like.
Wow. So do
But
you know if he ended up getting arrested and all that stuff or like
getting arrested. And they said my parents couldn't press charges on the man because ever officially took her off of the property. But this was like
okay.
early 90s, 94, because she was born in
Yeah.
90, like 94 when it happened. So, but
Uh-huh.
that's when I became really interested. And I'm like, why do people do these things? Because they're
Right?
sheltered, and I never thought anything bad happened. And so,
Right.
yeah.
Well, that is so interesting. I'm like intrigued by that. Here's that morbidity kicking in because I'm like, oh my God, that's fascinating to me. And you know what's so crazy is when I started this show and I told some friends about it. I mean, my friends came out of the woodworks. They were like, oh man, we love this. We have our own story. And just in some of my posts, like I'll get messages from friends and we're like, hey, I'm kind of sorta in a roundabout way related to this serial killer. And I'm like, what? Like, why didn't you tell me before? So yeah, super, super fascinated. But today we're gonna talk about Ted Bundy. Ted Bundy, not Bundy. I don't know where that accent came from. And so this one intrigued me for several different reasons. One, he didn't fit the criteria for a serial killer. I mean, I don't know if you watched last week we did oh gosh, what was the guy's name? Henry Lee Lucas. And so yeah, I mean, he was, kind of dirty, poor, blah blah blah. And then here you have a guy that's going to school, has a minor in psychology and, is overall really well liked. And so my thoughts were like, okay, what was his childhood like? And so anyway, during this confession tapes, it takes you through his journey. And I think the eerie part of all of this is that you're hearing him and
Mhm.
he's long since dead. But you're actually hearing his words, what his thoughts were. So anyway, before we dive in, did you actually watch the movie with Zac Efron?
I
That
didn't. I
you
not
didn't? Okay. So I'm like, okay, so okay, I think Zac Efron is a little hottie and he did really good. You almost like kind of like, hey, Ted Bundy was hot, but Ted Bundy was not hot, people. He was not hot.
But I also think, back in he wasn't a good looking man, but back in his day, he literally had a following of women that literally loved him and
Yeah.
sitting to him and writing him, and even Carol, who he ended up marrying, like they were so fascinated and so in love with this man, even though he did all these horrendous things. But they
But
loved him.
what's so crazy is there's like a pattern of this type stuff. So I don't know if in recent history, of course, very recent, the Chris Watts, he's got women, boosting his ego currently. There was is it some Ramirez? I think it was, I can't remember the last name, Ramirez. Well, anyway, so this guy had nothing so that they would buy his suits from a Goodwill. And of course, he lives in California. So the suits that were donated were Armani. And so he's got like this chiseled face and then he's wearing these suits and all these women were like sitting in court, like ready to marry this guy. And then he does end up marrying somebody. And then you've got Scott Peterson, the same thing. It's like, those are the women that I want to talk about. Those are the ones that I want to interview. Like, what the heck was going through your mind? So I think and I'm going to talk about this guy in the future. This Ramirez guy, I mean, his was freaking crazy, but she ended up marrying him, but she drew the line when she learned that he had murdered children. So she divorced him when she found that out. But I'm like, oh, so you're okay with him murdering other women, but the children was what drew the line for you.
Yes. Is he the one that they call the Night Stalker?
Yes. That was
Yeah.
him. And he had a rough upbringing, but anyway, so let's go back to Bundy and let's talk about this confession tapes because this is crazy to me, but it's hard to wrap your mind around it. So a little bit about him. So this documentary is based on tapes that were recorded, basically 6 months, 100 hours of conversation from death row. And the guy that's doing this, his name is Stephen McCod. So he's the one who decides to take on this task. He said he's young and hungry and he's looking for a good story, but he doesn't know how to approach it. So he reaches out to his mentor, and this name should sound familiar to you guys because we talked about him last week. His name is Hugh Ainsworth. This gentleman also participated in interviewing Henry Lee Lucas. And so that's why kind of why they feel like they caught Henry Lee Lucas was because of Ted Bundy. But this Hugh Ainsworth, man, he was serious. Like he went and investigated and put timelines together for Henry Lee Lucas. And so that was kind of his job here for Ted Bundy, was to go reinvestigate while this Stephen McCod was interviewing Ted in prison. So the Stephen goes on to say that he receives a message that Ted had sent out saying that he would grant an interview if they would re-examine all the cases to prove that he was innocent. So of course you're just like, man, if there's an innocent man sitting on death row, let's, try to help him out. And so that's the angle that they were going to take when it came to this, when it came to Ted Bundy. So what was your first impression when you when you're thinking like maybe say you hadn't known any of the history, like, man, there's a guy on death row that wants to talk about his innocence, because you hear about people being on death row that are truly innocent, and I feel like
Mhm.
he wanted to get that sympathy card.
So for me, Ted Bundy is such a narcissistic
Yes.
psychopath. Okay. So if I would not have known and thought and like just came into this as just like, oh, this guy's on death row, he didn't do it. But as soon as you start talking to him, as soon as the reporter goes in and starts talking to him, or the journalist, it was like horrendous. Like, this man is so full of himself.
Yeah.
And so then I'm like, okay, he is a psychopath, just because that's how I think. Like, when someone goes in and they're just wanting to talk about them and all the things that they are just so great and everything. But yeah, I I don't know, because there is, Lubbock does have an innocence project,
Right.
like
Hmm.
that. And so hearing stories from other people about they really are innocent, and it's so sad, and I believe everybody should have a fair go about and everything,
Right.
but it's so hard to go in thinking, for me to be like, oh well, he might have been innocent or whatever, because I know that he wasn't, and
Right.
it's hard over that part. So
Right. So last week's episode, I'm going to keep referring to that for a little bit. So there was a couple of victims that spoke out. And so originally when Henry Lee Lucas confessed, they talk about how they were looking at it through victims' eyes. So which meant that everything that he said, they were like, yeah, that's true. That's true. And so they ended up saying in their minds, yeah, he killed him. And then
mhm.
once they started hearing, well, maybe he didn't kill them, they went back to review his confession, and they're like, wait a second. So he comes in through this window, but there's a curio cabinet. He couldn't have moved that on his own. Or he says he found a bracelet, but how did he find that bracelet if, she actually didn't have it? And these were the details that we gave the police officer. So, kind of in that, you're just kind of like, okay, let's give the benefit of the doubt when it comes to this. But like you said, when he brings this, when this journalist comes in, it's like he can't do enough to steer him away from talking about himself.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things that's noted in there is the way he portrays himself in his childhood, it was just like the idyllic childhood. Like, no, I didn't have any issues. So let's go to so the reason he sent out this message to grant the interview was to re-examine all the cases to prove that he was innocent. But guys, this was the 1970s, and they were overwhelmed with serial killers. But at that time, the word serial killer wasn't a thing. And you had people like Charles Manson. And that, I mean, if you look at him, I mean, you see crazy in those eyes. I mean, it's like one of those immediate, this guy's, batshit crazy for real. And then you see Son of Sam, then you see John Gacy, and then you throw in Ted Bundy. If you look at all of the first three, I mean, you can see psycho, but then you look at Ted Bundy, and I mean, he's kind of normal looking,
Well,
like he's an average Joe.
and he's an educated man. He went to college,
Mhm.
has a degree. He was going to law school. Like, you think that people that do these, something, to me, they're geniuses. But like Manson,
Mhm.
he had like, I don't know about him, but he had like this genius about him, this like, but it's like off the wall genius. Like, he's
Right.
not. But that's how I feel about Ted Bundy. Is, he went to school, but I feel like he did that to have an edge, so that way he could be like, well, I've gone to school, I have my degree in this, why would I ever do things like this? And then, he was able to get in with the police department for a short amount of time, but it was more of to learn about
It was to
how.
do his homework.
Yes, yes, and that's what is insane, is he literally, a lot of things that he did, I feel like he did it to get one up on everybody.
And I'm telling you, the guy truly did one up everybody. So, okay, so you mentioned that he went to school. So here's a couple of things. Um, so the thing that scared people in this time was that he didn't fit the mold, and the guy was rubbing elbows with people in politics, and he was well liked. It's crazy because typically they're not they're out in public, but they're not like out in public. You know what I mean? Like he's photographed in a campaign. And he's actually what's it? I guess when Nixon was running for president. He's in those campaign photos and stuff, and
Yeah.
I don't know. So that Stephen, which is the journalist that was in there, he would come to realize they actually had some commonalities. They both had, from single products of single moms, and they would end up in Tacoma, and they wound up having mutual acquaintances, although they didn't know each other. And so
Because weren't they born in like the same town?
they were like born in the same town, and they both moved over to Tacoma, which was like, how crazy is that? And how weird. And now I'm interviewing you and you're on death row. So this is how it ended up. And so a little bit of history about Ted Bundy. So he was born in Vermont, and he was born in a home for unwed mothers. And originally in the 1800s, the home was called like women without friends or friendless women or something something crazy like that. And so anyway, then eventually it was changed for home to unwed mothers. So the reason she was sent there, because obviously she was unwed, and it would brought like a bunch of shame to the family, that a very religious family, that she'd had a child out of wedlock. And so you learn that his birth certificate would go on to say that his father was unlisted or unknown or something. And they raised him thinking that his sister was actually his mother. So he grew up with this as a sister. And so then you start thinking, okay, so is this what's setting up a pattern for him to be the way that he is now? Because the way he talks about his childhood, he tells everybody that he had the idyllic childhood, that he was really good. But they interview this young lady, not a young lady, they interview this lady named Sandy Holt, and she paints a whole different picture of Bundy's grown childhood. And so she's talking about that he had a horrible speech impediment. He tried to fool and lie to other children. He didn't do well in Boy Scouts. And she said no one tried to date him. And they did. I think it's Bundy that's saying, oh, we went to church every Sunday. Oh, we did this as a family. We did this as a family. But I looked through several different articles, and basically it's like he didn't have a good relationship with his stepfather. He did not bond at all with them. And it's like, and they had like, so his mom and the stepfather ended up having a bunch of other kids, and it said it just kind of pushed him further and further apart from all of them. And so then you see, also see that he was socially awkward, and he was a bull. I mean, he was bullied. So it's like you're putting all these things in, but yet Bundy denies all of this. And these are just like the psychologists and criminologists and everybody else that has, tried to be into his mind and stuff. And so Stephen goes on to, the journalist says that he wanted to steer him towards talking about the murders, and he's not budging. He's all about himself and painting this picture of just what a wonderful character he is. And he talks about himself, but then he also starts talking about Diane Edwards. And Diane Edwards was only in his life for a little bit, but she left a lasting impact on him. So they met his junior year, and her family was well off. They were affluent, and he describes her as a beautiful dresser, a beautiful girl. And he does admit that she was out of his league. And I don't know, you might want to correct me, Samantha, but I think they said that this was like the first girl that he was intimate with, right?
Yes. Well, he said that they like drove around and made out and,
Yeah.
stuff, but he said he didn't I guess it wasn't, he didn't become sexually active basically until he was doing the politics. And so I'm not sure if that was with her or with someone else. But
Right.
one thing I do want to bring up is, when his childhood friend was talking, or the sister of his childhood friend, she did
Mhm.
say that he used to dig holes and put, and what do they call it, a tiger's pit, where they would
Yes.
sharpen sticks and put it on the ground or inside the holes, and then put leaves and everything on top.
Yes.
And that is one thing that I'm like, normal kids don't do that thing. Like normal kids
No.
do this. And that one girl did fall into the pit and did cut her leg up. But that's like one of the signs, like when you look back, where did he, where was he starting to go wrong? I would say that is definitely one thing.
So you say that, and it brings me back to where they were talking about how he was bad in Boy Scouts. I'm like, did he learn that in Boy Scouts? Like booby traps? Is that a thing that they teach? Because
Yeah,
because he definitely succeeded. Like you said, the girl fell and she had like this huge gash on her leg. And
yeah,
then so is this like a glimpse into his dark side? Some other
yeah.
things that I had read about him was that one of his aunts told that he would be like sticking butcher knives in between her sheets, and he was like giggling about it. And so you're just like, okay, so this is, more of his dark coming in.
Yeah.
And then they would, and I don't remember if this was all in the documentary, but they do mention that maybe like the dad was the grandpa who was raised him as his dad. I mean, you can see the confusion there, who would say that he was like super abusive and, maybe had some bipolar tendencies and stuff like that. And
Yeah.
again, Bundy's denying all of this. Bundy's
Well,
like,
the
never
mom
happened.
the mom left him when he was born. The mom actually left him in the home.
Hmm.
She went back to her home, and the dad, her dad, was like, "You have to go get him. Like, you're not going to leave him there." So she initially didn't even want him. And
Right.
so did he know all that? Like, is that something that came, or, I know that he, like, later on in life, I'm wondering if he knew all that his mom never even wanted him, that she returned back to her home without him.
And so and then there's another thing too that comes through my mind is because so they never knew who his father was. They said that he might have been a Penn State U.S. Air Force graduate, and then they also mentioned the name Jack in there. But a third possibility was that he was actually a product of a rape by the grandpa. So grandpa was in essence dad.
So,
So maybe that's
uh,
why.
well,
So that's why maybe he wanted him to be picked back up, you know.
yeah.
So I don't know. There's a lot of unknowns. I don't think that we'll ever know truly who his dad was, just because one, I don't know if they've ever done DNA on all that stuff, and two, just because his birth certificate shows unknown. So the mom would be the only one that would know, and she passed when she was 88. But so most of the serial killers that I've covered, they had a lot of mom issues. So you can definitely see that he had mom issues here. Only this mom is different from the other moms because she in fact never believed that he did any of these murders, that he committed any of it. She was, I mean, staunch in her belief that he was a good boy, that they took him to Sunday school. And you can hear her voice in these tapes as well, because they would call her and interview her, and she was like, I have all faith that he is innocent in all of this. He's a good boy. And you're
Yes.
just like, okay, so this varies from the other stances.
Yes, and they're both delusional. I mean,
Mhm.
wonder no, I'm not meaning to say anything bad about the mom, but obviously the mom thinks that everything's hunky dory and nothing's ever been wrong, and her son is absolutely perfect. And you're like, you're delusional, lady. Like,
Yeah.
she has no, she doesn't have, I don't know, she just never thinks that he actually did anything. And then
Yeah.
when they're actually talking about it, and the two journalists actually go to her house to play the tapes and everything, and she's like, after it's done, she's like, okay, do y'all want apple pie and ice cream?
I know. It's like she's just like, thanks for that story time, but here
Yeah.
it's time for dessert.
Yeah, and they said the whole time she's just sitting there and she's making like they said she's making just weird noises, like as if a mouse was making these noises. And then she just gets up like nothing and is like, "Okay, let's have some apple pie ice cream."
I
Like
mean, she was in denial, all in caps, more than just a river in Egypt. The lady was crazy. I mean, I have no other words for her. I mean, God rest her soul, she's dead, but still.
yeah, and then so you think, okay, so obviously if the mom is acting this way, Ted obviously must have gotten some of her sense of denial and maybe
Yeah.
like her whole life where she just denied everything and everything was perfect. So then maybe Ted got that from her that, he's
Oh, yeah.
him.
Yeah, I mean, she must have told him, "You're perfect. You can never do any wrong in life. You are great." And, maybe she just overcompensated for having left him in the unwed mother, the the women shelter until she was made to go back to get him. I don't know. Hey, good morning, Minnie. Yeah, she said denial, straight up denial. It's so true. But so anyway, he talks about this Diane Edwards, and she starts to lose interest when she goes back home to California over the summer, and she stops writing to him. And what does he do? Instead of getting over it, he stews on this rejection and he wants revenge. And the crazy part is like, I went blank. I don't know what I did that summer. So it's like, so you had like this mental breakdown and you just go on a killing spree. Okay, so legit, that is kind of a fear of mine, that I like might kill somebody in my sleep because I watch so much crap. So just know that I'm innocent. I did it in my sleep. I didn't do it on
It's
purpose.
not intentional.
Right. It's because I fill my head with this crap. So anyway, some criminologists who studied his pathology feel like she influenced the type of women that he hunted and the rage that he felt toward them.
And
And if you ever go ahead.
I honestly believe that because if you look at every single woman that
Yes.
that they all look similar, they all had the brownish hair, they all had the
Hearted.
scars. Yes. And if the first two that were killed or abducted, they were very responsible. They had, going to school, they had great jobs. Like, so I honestly believe, and if you look at her picture, they are very familiar and look a
Mhm.
lot alike with every one of them that he killed. Other
Yeah,
than
all of his victims were very cookie cutter. Yeah, I mean, you're exactly right.
18 to 21, except the last one, and she was only 12. But I feel like he did that one out of, I don't know, like it was just a timing thing. Like she was there and he just did it more than
Yeah.
he actually like kind of hunted her. But okay, sorry, go back. Sorry.
No, 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 you're good. So, just the thing that was, super crazy to me is that he went on this killing spree and he snaps and they all look alike. And so then they bring in this female detective. And so if you look at the female detective when she's young, she starts thinking, oh my gosh, I could be one of his victims, because she's educated. She looks a brunette and she looks just like the rest of them. And so she's just kind of like, oh my gosh, I could totally be his next person. And
Mhm.
so a year prior to his killing spree, and you touched on this, Samantha, he works briefly at the Seattle Crime Prevention Advisory Commission. Say that 3 times fast. And he's given access to crimes against women statistics and what the police did and didn't do. And he learned about the inconsistency from one jurisdiction to the next. So I feel like this was the insight what he needed to be successful. And I mean that like, not successful, but successful in his killing sprees, and that he managed to um, elude the authorities for a while. But I think he started with all of his ego, he started getting crazy sloppy. Because I mean, 2 of the girls that go missing in broad daylight. And so this is crazy because there's 40 freaking thousand people at this event in Lake Sammamish, which I love to say that word, Lake Sammamish. And so anyway, so these girls go missing, and so kind of what his MO was, he carried this oak wood thing, and he would bludgeon these girls, knock them unconscious, and say, "Oh, my arm is hurt. Can you help me do this?" And so these girls, being nice or, feeling sorry for the fool, they follow him to his car. He knocks them unconscious, throws them into the car, and that's the last that they're seen. And this was his MO for most of them. He did, I want to say, like, his very first victim. So he like, my gosh, he like rapes her with like a curtain or something, and like he left like permanent damage to her, but she lives. She does survive this. And it you just, again, this is one of those, like, why do we blame Diane Edwards for this, and do we say how lucky, Diane, you were that you escaped this? I mean,
Yeah.
it's
And I can't her fault at all. It's his fault. I mean,
right.
he has something absolutely wrong with him. And I always wonder, so they say that most serial killers had a head injury when they were a child, had a major head injury.
Right.
So I want to know, did he have a head injury? Did he, like, for him to do these things, and he was so like smiling about it, and just like, oh, look at me, but I didn't do this. That's crazy. Like,
Right.
and I'm like, you are psychotic. And even when he abducted those women at the lake, like, he went up to multiple women, and asked them, and a lot of them turned him down. And these two women, did not turn him down and actually helped him. But just think, like, how many, like, he put himself out there so much that day, and he was sloppy. He was super sloppy
Mhm.
that day. And that's how they found out his name, because
Yeah.
before, they knew the name of whoever was, but friends were listening when that woman was abducted. They were
Yeah.
listening. He said, "My name's Ted." And so that's where they first found out his name.
Right. And then too, so they were like, we witnessed them, introduce themselves. Name is Ted. And they also were like, he drives a brown VW Beetle. And so, you're just like, how many people drove a VW Beetle in that time? Oh, 42,000 in that area. And you're like, well, that was a popular little car.
I know. How was that so, like, I mean, nothing against VW Beetles, but they're not very, like,
I
I
mean,
would,
they're collectors now.
yes, absolutely. But I would have never thought that there would have been that many just in that area.
What I would never thought that a serial killer would pick that as his getaway car. Like, how fast was it? Because at one point in time, he does outrun a police officer in that Beetle, and you're just like,
Yes,
huh.
yes.
And okay, so confession time. I at one point in time did want a Beetle, not because Ted Bundy had one, but just because I really thought they were super cute.
Yeah.
But I'm over that now.
My grandfather actually still has a goldish brown VW Beetle in his shop right now. And that was supposed to be my first car, but it
Really?
was so messed up that my dad was so afraid of me driving it that he said no. But so that always makes me laugh, because it's still there, and I've always been like, I want that, because it's one of the older model ones. And then I'm like, oh, I could have been driving around like Ted Bundy. Like,
I know. I could have been confused for a serial killer because that's the color, right? It was like a goldish brown.
yes, yes,
And the funny thing is that so he basically copied was it somebody else that was on the campaign, right? That had this same vehicle.
yes. It was an older man that the man says that he was his Ted looked up to him as like his mentor, because that man actually went to law school as well and had the Beetle. But I think that man's Beetle was orange, if I can remember correctly.
Okay.
But yes, and he was like fascinated, I think, by him, and he kind of wanted to mimic this man.
Yeah, just so crazy. I guess men driving Beetles, it was a thing back then because it's certainly I've not seen one drive one now.
I know, but you also look at men used to wear like skin tight bell bottoms and like,
Shorty shorts.
yeah, like super short where accidents could happen at any time. And so, and have like the super long hair, they did a lot of like things that I would not think of now that they would
Right.
do. But of course, now you have the skinny jeans, but still, you had the super tight, high waisted bell bottoms that they used to wear with their tucked in, tight polyester shirts. So,
And then the sleeves rolled up. No, that was the 50s. Never mind.
yeah.
So anyway, so they introduce Liz into this one, and this is his next love. And she's a single mom, which don't get me started on that. So, and he says I didn't open myself up to her fully, which thank God you
Yes.
didn't, because man, if you imagine, I just can't imagine if she would have. He said, a part of me was like, when I read this, it was just like, does she know what kind of sort of psycho that she was sleeping with? But
Yeah.
she would eventually learn that she was like, he told her one time, he's like, I followed a sorority girl. And so then she starts putting these things into her mind, with all these murders. She starts thinking she's actually one of the first people, whenever they release a sketch and say the name is Ted,
Yeah.
which strangely enough, they said that they had hundreds of leads of people calling in and saying, I think my boyfriend is this killer. And I'm like, how many Teds are out there?
Well, not how many, and also why are you with this man if you think he's a serial killer? Like,
Yes.
still with this man. But yeah, she was the first one to call and be like, she gave every description and she said he drives a brown beetle and he talked about this. But also I have to think like they moved in together pretty quickly
Right.
and she had a daughter. And so I wonder if there was anything that he ever did to the daughter. I pray that he didn't, but there's always that thought that he was a horrible person. So,
Right. So that's exactly where I went with that, because I'm like, oh my gosh, she had a daughter.
yeah,
Like, and this is my soapbox. I'm gonna get on it because I'm like, single moms, when you're dating, please, please, please be uber careful with who you bring home. Cause it's like you never know who you're bringing home. I mean, obviously, this woman did not know who she brought home. She brought home a freaking serial killer. And it's like, how lucky was this child? How lucky was Liz that she was able to get out? And you know what, too, kudos to her for having the balls to call and say, I think it's him. Because I'm going to tell you right now, I can probably tell you that there would be some women that would be, oh, I don't think it's him. Like, in the back of your mind, you think it is, but you're just like, I'm not going to call that in. One, probably because they don't want to get killed and, be the next statistic. But still, I mean, that I think that took a lot for her to say that, especially because she'd already had, a failed relationship. She was a single mom, and I don't know. I think there was a lot at stake for her. But I mean, like I said, kudos to her for having the nerve to get out and say that. So,
and you also
so we're into. Go ahead.
he did not like actually call in and say when would they have caught him, like, you know what I mean, like, which they didn't catch him for a long time, but
Right.
like when would he have came up on the radar for the police, like if she would not have called in.
Yeah, would he ever have been caught? Would we be like kind of like the Golden State Killer at this point
Yes,
and have to wait for a DNA test to reveal
and wait
that,
2 years or however long, 50, 40 years, whatever it is, yeah,
yeah,
exactly.
you're arresting an old man at this point who's just like everybody loves him because he's the old man across the street and he's so cute and squishy. And, you're like, he could never have done it. This was my neighbor so and so. Yeah, so you're totally right. Had she not, how long would we have waited,
Yeah,
for this to come? Or had we ever would have solved it?
yeah, because they didn't do DNA back then. They
No.
didn't have that capability. They didn't. And one thing that like was so crazy to me is, these murders and these rapes and everything were happening in different states, and
Yes.
nobody's talking to each other. Nobody, even like the police, like they just don't. Which, of course, back then they didn't have the capability of just getting
The
on the computer.
APBs and the Twitters and
Yes. Yes. I mean, they even said at one point, we didn't even have fax machines at that time. Like, they would have to write letters, but it blows my mind how not even in different towns, the police departments did not talk to each other about the things that were going on.
And it's mentioned in this documentary. Good morning, Priscilla. Thanks for joining us this morning. It is mentioned in this documentary where they would call and be like, "How many women do you have missing?" And they'd be like, "Well, we have two." And they're like, "Well, how many do y'all have?" And then they wouldn't share the information. The thing is he exploited all of these loopholes whenever he was working for that advisory committee. He exploited all of that, and he knew good and well, like how he was going to be able to get away with it. Again, this brings you back to genius level thinking. Not a good, this is evil genius, not good genius, not used for good powers. And you think, he knew that how to work the system. So he'd already done enough damage here. Then he moves on to Utah where he, continues. And so he went on the guise that he was going to go to, be accepted as a lawyer, or he was accepted into that university for to do his lawyer stuff. And then too, though, he's doing all of this to get back with Diane. So, I mean, he's still trying. I mean, his brain is just going. His brain is just working, every which way to get, I don't know, one, to murder people, one, to get back with her. And at one point in the campaigns, he introduces her as his fiance, even though he's with Liz at this time. And so, I mean, the guy was busy. So the thing is this Stephen, the journalist, he is talking about, so he's been talking to him for weeks already about, this stuff, and they're not getting anywhere. So he's still talking about himself and building himself up. And I can't remember what word he uses. He's like, I feel as though he was trying to do like this, like an autobiography, but like a famous person autobiography. So here you go. Here you have this egotistical narcissist, and you can see it, come to fruition. And so he starts thinking, how am I going to get this guy to talk?
Yeah.
So one day he comes up with this ploy. I'm going to get him to start talking in third person. And so now, I don't think we've discussed this. So he gets like a degree in Chinese or something, but he also has like a minor in psychology. So he plays on that. He plays on his ego. He plays on his psychology minor, and he starts saying, you're going to be an expert witness because you're so intelligent. You tell us how these things happened. And he said he picks up the recorder, and he kind of just forgets that he's there, and he just starts talking into this recorder. And so then you just start seeing all of his confessions unfold. And so he goes to explain that there's an entity that has developed. This is how he describes it. There's this entity that's taken over, and it develops a pornographic habit, and then gradually naked women connect with violence. And so he's like saying, well, and you can hear him talking about this, so chilling. He's like, when does this individual act out? And then he's like, the feeling of anger and resentment and all of that grows and grows until finally the entity takes over. And one of the things that gets me is that the Stephen said, Bundy had blue eyes, but once he started talking about this entity, his eyes turn black. And I'm like, oh, freaky. Oh, can you imagine being in there with the freaking serial killer that first doesn't want to talk about murders, and then his ego freaking takes over, Satan takes over, and he starts talking about these murders, and your eyes just go black. And I'm like, he was possessed, man.
Well, and he said whenever he was doing it, he grabs a hold of the tape recorder of the tape recorder and just holds on to it, and is
Yes.
like just talking. And yeah, and that's insane to me, because it was like he had so much like pride, and he was so proud of what he did. So
Yeah.
proud of what he did. Yeah.
And I think, that right there is your ego. That's your narcissism. And so he was saying, so this is, I don't remember what episode. So they interview this young lady, and she, I mean, fits the description of his little cookie cutters to a T. I mean, she's gorgeous. They show all of her pictures and stuff, and she was like, I just got in this Camaro and I was at the mall, and she said this police officer comes up to me and is telling me, hey, your car's been broken into, can you tell us if anything is missing? And so she talks about how she looks in her car, she's like, nothing's missing. And he's like, well, we need to go down to the police department, and we need to file a oh, what do you call it? File a case. Is it a case? I'm
Yeah,
at
a
a loss for
report.
words.
Well,
File
said
a
that
report.
she
Yes.
that said that they had the man down there at the police station. And
Mhm.
she was already apprehensive because of everything, all the women that were being murdered and going missing and everything. She was already apprehensive. And so she asked him, can I see your badge? And she said he got agitated at her. Like, he was agitated that she would even ask. And so he just pulled it out really quickly. And so she was like, oh, okay. Well, he has to be legit. Like, he has a badge.
Right. I don't know what the badge said. It looked like legit one.
Yeah, exactly. And then she also said she had, she was apprehensive because he put her in his Volkswagen. And she was like,
Yes,
well,
there
that's
comes
weird
that
for a cop.
APW.
Yeah, and she's like, that's for a cop to, and she was like, well, maybe he's undercover. And I'm like, honey, red flags, so many red flags. Like, but she thought he was a cop. Like,
Yeah. I mean, because we rationalize it in our heads. Okay, so yeah, so there it's totally legit. He could be an undercover police officer. I've seen plenty of unmarked cars. I know what they look like. And
yeah,
then two, you're just like, okay, he whips out a badge. So you're just like, okay, let me go in there. So she gets in the car. And so is he about to rape her? I can't even remember what all he was going to do, but she manages to open the car door and flee. So she gets out of there. So she has a good look. I mean, a good look at him, knows exactly what he looks like, is able to escape. There's a car that's come in and she's able to flag them down
yeah. Well,
and call.
handcuff her, and he got one handcuff on her arm, and she
Okay.
was fighting back. And so she still had the handcuffs, but and as she's fighting back, that's when she was able to open the door and escape. But she got out with the one handcuff on. So he
Yeah.
was trying, he was going to do something, and he was obviously going to kill her and rape her, but she fought back, like, and
Mhm.
then
So she fights back, she gets out, she manages to, and so of course he runs off scared. But what does he do? He's not that scared because he goes off and he kills somebody like 4 hours later. And so of course she's left with the survivor's guilt, thinking like, oh my gosh, had, he taken me, then, this person would have lived. And, so you go back and forth with those dynamics. So this is pretty funny. Priscilla said she's going to have to read about him. Girl, it's on Netflix. It's Ted Bundy's confession tapes. Don't have to read nothing. Just watch it. It's only 4 short episodes. And then Joanne, in a Beetle, I think not exactly. Like, this Beetle didn't have any lights on it. It did
nope.
not scream police car. Oh, I know. It's so crazy. So anyway, fast forward, they go to court, and what does he do? He intimidates her. Like, she's telling him, it was him, he did this, and he gets up and he's talking to the judge, and he's like, she's lied before and she's lying now. And you're just like, oh my gosh, the fact that she had to face him was enough, but then he accused her of lying about it. I mean,
Well, and kudos to her, because for her to have the guts to go up there and actually testify against that man is like amazing, because she was
yeah.
young, 17 when it happened. So she was so young. Like, but kudos to her for doing that.
I mean, I agree because I mean, I would be scared. I would, kind of like some PTSD would have formed. Like, I don't want to be anywhere near him. What if he comes at me? What if
Yeah.
he's not restrained? So, and I don't think he was restrained when he was in court, because they talk about how well pressed he was, how presentable he was. And of course, he was well read. I mean, he knew what he was talking about. He'd gone to some law school, even though he dropped out. I mean, he knew some of the stuff.
One of
And
the
so, go ahead.
that he knew enough about law, but he didn't know everything, but he
Right.
knew enough to make himself seem like he was just, on top of the world and he knew everything, but he really didn't.
Right. So he knew that this is probably where the phase "fake it till you make it"
Yes.
comes to play because he did very, he did well for himself. And so just what he would try to do to lure these young women, we mentioned it before, is he would try to be in a cast, I mean, in a sling, and try to be helpless. And so this is what he prayed, because he didn't look like, the crazy John Wayne Gacy clown wearing, that killed little boys. He didn't look like that. So of course you're going to want to help him, you know?
Oh yeah.
But and we're running out of time because this is really good. So he would go on to, what did they say? Did they catch him? I guess it was 30 something young
He
women, but they feel like it was more.
But wait, before we do this, we have to go back to he actually killed a police chief's daughter and was
Yes, yes, yes.
arrested, but not for just technically that. He was arrested for, I believe, her abduction, the 17-year-old girl. And he escaped jail two
Oh my
times.
gosh. Yes, he
Two
did.
times. First one, they had him in the law library and he jumped out of the window. Like, they didn't have him in handcuffs, they didn't have him in shackles, they didn't even have a guard in the room with him. Like, that is
Right.
just, but also at that time they did not realize that he'd committed so many murders and had done so much. But then after they get him back, he was, I believe, like 7 days he was hiding in a cabin.
Yeah.
And they said when he came back, he literally lost enough weight to fit through the ceiling of the jail cell and got different clothes from a jailer. Like, the jailer wasn't helping him, but I guess at that point,
He was actually out at the movies with his wife, so he was by himself.
yes, and he literally escaped again. And then that's when he managed to make it all the way to Florida, and he killed those women at the sorority, and two of the
Mhm.
women survived. And then 6 blocks away, he killed another woman. Like, that is just insane to me that he was able to escape
Yeah.
two times to escape. And then the worst part is that the second time he escaped is he killed those innocent women. Like, that's so sad.
In one of those that you're talking about now that he killed in Florida, one of them, he barged into her room, and she's talking about, she was, doing her nightly prayers. She's praying her rosary. And I've always wondered, I've just been curious, like, so when this happened, did he, like, at that point, because he heard prayers, maybe, did he back out and not kill her? Because he didn't hurt her, but he went on to hurt other girls in there. So I'm just like, did he have an attack of conscience at that point? I mean, because she could have suffered the same fate and she didn't. So I've always been,
Well, and they always
you
say
know,
that raised religious, and they
right.
always saying he went, his parents were religious and all that stuff. So that is a good point. Did he, because of his religion and hearing all this, did he back out because of that?
Yeah, and so Minnie is saying, she said, those last crimes should not have happened. And you're so right. Why is it that this serial killer is granted access to a law library, granted access to, I mean, you might as well just have opened the dang door and just let him walk on out. I mean, there was no reason for him to jump if you're just going to just be, frilly willy nilly. But again, we saw how willy nilly, what's his face was Henry Lee Lucas. I mean, he welcomed you into his office without wearing handcuffs. And then you have this notorious, serial killer, just walking around like nothing. I'm like, what the heck? And then around scissors.
And the saddest thing is, like, I guess it was the sheriff of that town. He said, this is a bad thing. And he's telling the reporters, they have it on video. So if y'all go and watch this on Netflix, you can see all. But he's telling the reporters and he's smiling and he's like, well, if he hurts someone else, I'm going to have to press charges. We're going to put charges on these jailers and all this stuff that, because he was able to get released. But the whole time he's like smiling and like giggling, like kind of like chuckling about it. And I'm like, sir, like, you just let like this horrible man get out. Like, this is on you. You are the one that is supposed to be
Yeah.
here. Like, it is insane to me. And then in his trial, sorry, I know we're running out of time, but
No, no, go ahead. Go ahead. My show. We can do whatever.
in his trial, when they're literally convicting him of the Florida murders and everything, and the judge is like, oh, I have nothing. I don't hold any animosity against you. Like, at the end, after he finds him guilty and, is sentencing him. And I'm like, I just feel like that is so inappropriate. Like, and he's like, well, I just feel like it's a waste of good talent and all this stuff. I don't care if he was freaking Bill Gates and like, or, super smart.
Right.
The judge should have never, like, that was such an insult to these other families, to all these victims, and he's just like, I don't hold animosity towards you. Like, I think you're a good guy. That just blew my mind. Like,
I mean,
absolutely.
that's neither here nor there for him to have said that. I mean, way out of line. And what does this do? What does this do? This boosts his freaking ego. His head is already big. And then here's this judge telling you you're a fine, outstanding citizen, young man, even though you murdered these people. And let's not forget to mention, this fool was a necrophiliac, okay? So not only did he murder these women and drop them off in remote locations in the woods, he would go back to their bodies. Okay, so in my morbid, twisted mind, I'm like, how did Liz not get corpse rash? Because I'm sure that they were still, sleeping with each other. Like, she had to have had some sort of something, some sort of evidence, some sort of maggots growing on some parts of her body, because he slept with these bodies. He would go back. And guys, he talks about, the crazy thing is he's like, it's not about the murder. It's like a possession. Like, they become yours once you murder them. These victims become a part of you. And it's freaking chilling the way that he recounts it. And he's just like, it's about them becoming your possession. And then he, talks about going back and visiting. So, I mean, okay, so he necrophilia, raped and murdered, and okay, so listen, guys, he also cut off their heads and had them as trophies.
Yes.
And I mean, listen, this freaking Bundy world there's a lot of shit that this man did.
And, when he did his trial, he was representing himself along with like 3 or 4 other lawyers, but he mainly, so when for the detective, the first officer that was on scene of the sorority killings, Bundy is up there and he's literally like, tell me how you found them. Tell me. And he's wanting to know, well, tell me how you found the second one. Oh, so did you touch her body? Did you touch her? Like, he is like wanting more and more. And it is like so disgusting and so disturbing. And I honestly cannot believe the judge allowed that to keep going on. Like,
the judge was a freak.
Yeah. Yeah. And it was like, he's there. The officer is like talking about all these gruesome details and how he found them. And he's like just getting a kick out of it. And he's like, tell me more, tell me like what is the third body? Like, all these things. And then when he's having like interviews with the reporters, because they have him showing, like, he's sitting in the courtroom, like sitting on a desk, and he's talking to reporters. He's not handcuffed. He's not shackled. He's just sitting there, just having a conversation, and he's laughing, and the reporters are laughing. And I'm like, what is wrong with all of you? Like, what is wrong with you? Why in the world would you even allow this? But they said that, this was one of the major the major things that actually reporters were allowed in the courtroom, and they were allowed to, document everything. And that's another thing. Like, this guy, he wanted the fame, obviously, because, like, going back to when he was doing the politics stuff, he loved being on camera. He loved, like, feeling important is how I want to say it. Like, he like thrived off of feeling important.
And definitely.
And that's what these reporters were having him do. Well, like, he thought he was famous. I mean, it's sad. It's so awful. Like, how
And this goes back to his feeling of importance, his feeling of, you know, this starting this whole, granting these tapes to be recorded because he wanted his freaking 15 minutes of fame. And
yes.
boy, did he get them. I mean, because he was eager to tell, especially when it came to the third person, thinking that he was going to help solve these and, of course, be be innocent of all of this. And a couple of comments that we have, the rosary saved her. Joanne, I agree. I mean, faithful Catholic, that rosary, I mean, I that's exactly how I felt. I'm like, that rosary, definitely intervened. And Minnie says it's crazy how they remember so much detail. I know. And especially when you're up in that number of, 30 plus, heck, I don't even remember what I did yesterday, but these fools remember, what they were wearing, what he did, how he got her, what she looked like, what she was wearing. And then they remember to decapitate them and take the skulls back so they can sleep with them in their room. Like,
He's
that's
seen
some
them.
crazy.
He's seen them as trophies. They were his trophies. He hunted them. And that's so weird to me. So weird. And also, he literally said he was innocent and continued to say he was innocent until a few days before he was actually executed.
Mhm.
But he went and was just like, I didn't do this. Like, it's going to be crazy when y'all find the person that actually did this. And then he finally came out, and right before he was executed.
And he talked to his mama right before. And do you remember, did he ever tell her that he did it? I mean, I don't remember. I don't know if he ever even confessed to his mama.
I don't remember if he told her. I think he mainly talked to the FBI agent Bill, and um, that's who he confessed to. And then everything came out. And the creepiest thing, okay, so if y'all listen to the show, if you listen to it, he whispers exactly where one of the skulls is. And he is like whispering and he's like, can you hear me? Can you hear me? And that, just him whispering, creeped me out so bad. Just
Yeah.
he's so creepy. Like, I know he's dead now, but he is absolutely beyond creepy.
Yeah. Oh, totally creepy. I mean, just the things that he would say, just, saying that the corpse were his and he was
Yes.
connected. And, there are just so many creep moments in this. But guys, look, it's 4 episodes. You guys have to watch this. And I want to know what you guys think if y'all, especially if you catch this on the replay, because I mean, we could go on forever about this, but
Yeah.
just to kind of wrap up, he killed, I guess, did he confess to 30 or they pinned 30 on him?
Best of 30.
But they think that he might have done some more, but honestly, he probably would have said it there towards the end. You guys have to watch this. This is really good. And morbidly good. Okay, I'll go ahead and say that. It's morbidly good. It's a look into a freaking serial killer. You hear his own words. It's the same as Henry Lee Lucas, but only the thing is he actually did this. Henry Lee Lucas did not. And so anyway, Samantha, I love you. Thank you so much for coming on with me today. Just a couple of things. I mean, you were amazing. I loved that you had so much to say. I'm like, I think I'm going to need you back for some more shows.
I'm like, we could have probably extended this for like 4 hour, like 4 episodes,
I
because
know.
so much to say about this crazy, crazy man.
And you know what? Let's pin it. We'll put a pin in it, and we might come back and revisit this just because this is definitely something worth revisiting because honestly we only talked about, I want to say, maybe the first 2 episodes because the third and we lightly brushed in on the third and fourth episode, but we did go into quite a bit of detail about the first 2. So anyway, guys, watch that. Let me know what you think about it. And also, too, a reminder, we do still have the Pineapple Project going on until the 21st. We have a couple of items, one that we're raffling and 2 that we're auctioning off. So hop on over to the social and distancing page and bid on these items. Get your donations in, Venmo at the Pineapple Project. If you have any questions on it, just holler at me and we can talk about it. But Samantha, Thanks again so much for coming on, guys. And remember, let's keep talking sheep. We'll see you later. Have a good one.